Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share why it's so important that we listen to our intuition and how you can find ways to better trust yourself. We're also going to discuss trauma-informed yoga and how it can benefit you. Please help me in welcoming Mia Tarduno. Mia, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And I have to say that you are only, I think, my second local guest on the podcast.
Ooh, very fun.
Yes. So we're actually in the same county right now. We might even be in the same town, but we're definitely in the same county. We're not that far away. And I don't know about you, but I am waiting for the snow, which I think is coming tonight.
That's what they say. We'll see. My friends and I got to ski a quarter of a mile at the Nordic Center out and back like 7 times yesterday.
That is for people who don't live in a place like this and experience these things. That is early December snow for you. Absolutely. Well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I guess I would start by just describing myself as someone who's always gone a little bit against the grain. When I was younger, and especially into high school and college years, I traveled a bunch, still do. And I always just kind of had this idea of doing things a little bit differently. I never really understood the, I guess, kind of the ladder that I was taught in my culture. And I always kind of took it upon myself to say that I would always be someone to do things a little bit differently. So I've had a lot of really fun jobs. I've traveled all over and wasn't exactly sure where that was going to land me. But it's been a great ride. And so far, everything's caught me. And it's been really fun to see where those values can take me as I go.
Where do you think that came from, that feeling or desire to go against the grain and kind of march to the beat of your own drum?
I think this wonderful contrast that my parents had. My dad is a geophysicist and a dean of a college. My mom was an occupational therapist, and my dad was incredibly intelligent and very by the books. And my mom always did things a little bit differently. So I think it was just kind of fun for me to play with those dynamics of where I wanted to be. And I almost took it as a challenge to just kind of see. And it seemed that every time that I leapt and did something really risky, that it worked out. And that was always kind of something fun for me that I think probably put my parents in a lot of stressful situations a lot. And I thought it was a blast.
I did that to my parents when I became a police officer.
Yeah.
My mother, and she's going to watch this, so I have to be careful what I say here. But she was physically ill for like 3 days when I told her just that I had applied to the police department. She had like the flu or something very flu-like for days. So I get it 100%. Yeah.
And police officers make money, which is a good thing, because not everything that I've done has that or any job title. So there's all different kinds of headaches that I think we give our families when we just go off in different directions.
I think you are correct. So with your parents, with one being so by the book and the other being a little more coloring outside of the lines, did that ever cause stress between them in their relationship that you saw?
Not that I saw. I think it was actually a really, really wonderful contrast. My dad being a really awesome safety net and a rock. And that really allowed my mom to be her expressive, incredibly friendly self. So I think I was actually and am really grateful to see how sometimes those opposites can actually work really well together, and sometimes they need a little bit of it. I think my mom has been one to really pull my dad out into some experiences that he probably would never bother with. And she just likes having a blast. And so she was able to kind of take him with her. And I think that he's been able to expand his life in that way. And then, he's been really incredibly steady for her. And that's been something that she really needed.
And that's what I was going to ask, is if the flip side did occur where she was able to pull him a little bit, but then he also was able to kind of pull in the reins occasionally when maybe that was needed.
Absolutely. It's been really awesome to see.
Well, tell us what you are doing now.
Yeah, so now I run 2 businesses. My first is called Move, Create, Radiate, and I focus on yoga for women's health and cycle knowledge, so working with menstrual cycle awareness and reproductive health for women. And my second business is a yoga studio, Thrive Yoga in Frisco, Colorado, and we just opened in June. So now I have a physical space for the first time and run a yoga studio and event center here in Frisco.
So I want to get into the yoga and I want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about being a business owner and being a female business owner. Have you experienced any difficulties in moving into that space, not physically the space, well, maybe, but into the space of being a female business owner here in Colorado?
Fortunately, I haven't had many negative experiences with it. I have an incredible network of friends and other women entrepreneurs who were just my cheerleaders the entire way. I think some of the challenges and most of the challenges that I see right now are within myself. Having patterning as a woman of needing to be a certain degree of kind and compassionate, when sometimes as a business owner, there are decisions that need to be made for the business that aren't necessarily how I would speak to my best friend or how I would support a family member. And I think those have been really tough. It's kind of just understanding that now I have this other dynamic and this other identity where the businesses that I run are so much me right now. They're, pretty much everything is my creation. So there's still so much of myself embedded in it. And it can be tough to sometimes make decisions or say yes or no to things and be so clear on that as a woman. Where I've just noticed in podcasts that I've listened to or books that I've read that are written or spoken by males, just the language is so different. I just notice how they can be like, oh, I'm just not going to have that phone conversation. It's not worth my time. Or like, fired that person. They weren't worth it. And I'm like, but they're a person. And I'm like, wow, there's so much that I'm just noticing this. Like if I made that decision, I would feel so much shame and I would feel this guilt because as a woman, I've been taught that I need to take care of myself and my friends and my community. So I think that piece has been really incredible to just watch myself and try to learn along the way.
And how is that going? Because that is difficult and it's hard when you are wired to be a certain way, to kind of go against that and be more direct or harsh. Bitchy, may come out as a woman that, we get deemed bitchy when we are direct sometimes. So how has it been working through that?
Interestingly, so far, every time I've had to make a decision with that in mind, it's gone really well. Because I think that I have this underlying idea that I need to show up a certain way for our culture and for our community. However, I know that I'm making these decisions because they're a smart business decision, or because they need to be made, or because we need a clear boundary, or we need a clear protocol. And every time I do that, it just happens as it should. And people understand that. And they actually, people do like structure. So it actually helps to say like, oh, I've created this. And usually people are really receptive to it. So I think that's a learning process. And that's kind of where I was saying a lot of that's just internal, where I'm expecting it to be met with, kind of seen as like being too harsh, being too much. And really, if I'm clear with my intentions, that's exactly what it needed. And so a lot of that's just trusting my intuition, which is a great power to have as a woman. And actually using that can be really helpful.
Will you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how using your intuition as a woman through your life has benefited you, or have there been times that you've experienced where you maybe didn't listen and experienced the negative outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, I would say every single time that I've trusted my intuition, it has led me in the right direction, or in a direction that has just made my life so much better. I think it's really tough because I think it's a constant battle that we have as women, that there's so much that we know. And then I don't think that our intuition ever goes away, but how I see it is that it gets covered up. I think of them as like layers. So if we're stressed about something, and then we have maybe societal layers, and then maybe other people are telling us things, and then maybe we seek out advice, and then maybe our family is telling us something. And then we have all of these layers. So our voice is just like so far behind all of those that it's so hard to hear. So I guess I would say that anytime that I haven't listened to my intuition, it's just because I haven't really been able to hear it. And a lot of times if something will happen and I'm like, oh, I definitely should have taken that route, I knew it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us get to that point too, right? Where we're like, oh, I knew that was the thing. I should have just listened to that. But there were so many layers and so many voices in front of that, that it kind of just, we weren't able to hear it at the time. So I think a lot of those big risks that I've been able to take, a lot of those were like, I hope this is the right voice that I'm listening to. And luckily, a lot of them have been true, or at least have been able to guide me towards a great direction. But I do think it takes a lot of practice, and it takes consistent practice to decide really to listen to that voice and to trust it, especially if sometimes we're not even exactly sure. Because sometimes I think what comes out is like, oh, I should go travel here. I should take this job. I should quit this. Why do I have that feeling? It doesn't make any sense. And then we just have this, like our logic takes over a lot.
I agree with you. And I think that for a lot of our listeners and viewers, they have been through situations and feel like they can't trust themselves or trust their intuition. So will you talk a little bit to those people and kind of, maybe dig a little deeper into what you said about the layers, and so how can they regain that trust and the ability to hear that voice in themselves that they need to trust?
Absolutely. I think the first big part of that is self-forgiveness. Because it can be so easy to say, I knew that I shouldn't have chosen that, been in this situation, done this again. And it can just be so easy to get in this spiral. And I think that's what creates the mistrust. It's not necessarily the one mistake that we made. It's that, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I did that. And it becomes this shame. So I think one of the hardest and biggest ways to come back to that listening to intuition is first starting with the forgiveness of everything that we've been through. Allows us to learn something. And I think a lot of us who have been through especially tough times know that it's not easy, but we come out of it. And so I think as you keep working through that, some of the best ways that I've been taught and I like to work with intuition are just keeping things really, really simple. So I have a friend who actually her specialty is to work with intuition. And she's coached me before on just making little decisions throughout the day. So that could be, what do I want to wear today? What do I want to eat for breakfast? Maybe it's pasta. Like, what do I, without, because those are part of the layers, right? I should wear this. I should eat this. I should show up in this way today. I should start working on this because that's what I've always done. So starting to just ask ourselves those little things of, do I want to start work at 7 a.m.? Do I need to go for a walk first? What does my intuition say? What do I need right now? Do I need peanut butter and jelly? Do I need what do I need? So I've really enjoyed playing with those. And I think that they can help in a time when we're like, I don't even know who my intuition is. Like, where did that ever go? It's just realizing it's there all the time. And it can just be in these little ideas throughout the day of, I'm walking around town and I feel like going down this street instead of that street. Like, just see what happens. And every single time that we follow those, our intuition gets a little bit stronger. It's like feeding it. So it's like, oh, hey, they listen to me. Now I'll tell them this. Now I'll tell them this. And it might take a lot of those to get to a bigger point when we're making a huge decision in our lives and using intuition to get there. That can be a big stretch, but starting with little things throughout our day, I think, can just help to create more of that trusting relationship again with ourselves.
I really like that idea. And I think making those little decisions then does help you realize that in general, things are not going to go awry. Like, if you have pasta for breakfast because that's just what you're feeling and nothing terrible happens, it gives you a little more ounce of trust. And then when you go down that other street, when you're walking downtown and nothing terrible happens, it gives you that extra little boost of trust. So I think that's a great activity and a way that people can start in baby steps to build trust back in themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk about yoga, and I know, so I'm going to let you in on a secret. I'm terrible at yoga. I hate yoga because I feel like a failure when I do it. And there is this meme of the Tin Man. Have you ever seen that one?
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, that is me. The Tin Man, like, standing there and he's like, this is bullshit. That's me doing yoga. But I have done trauma-informed yoga. And I was just talking to my husband about it, and he was like, well, what is trauma-informed yoga? And I said, I can't really explain it to you, but it's different than regular yoga, and I actually like it. So will you explain trauma-informed yoga?
Absolutely. So I'd love to start by explaining what it's not. And I feel
Perfect.
like sometimes that helps. In trauma-informed yoga, there is no right or wrong. There are actually not poses. There are only suggestions for shapes. There is not a hierarchy of a teacher and students. And the objects of the class, the goals of the class, are to empower the people who are practicing, to share tools for resiliency and self-regulation, and to create a safe and welcoming and supportive space for students to be in. The only goals for the students are just to explore and discover their body and their breath. And that can look like anything. So there is generally a structure that the teacher will bring into class just to give some suggestions for students so that we're not just giving them an hour of good luck. But there's a lot of options. There's a lot of different languaging. So one of the first things that students will notice, and some of them don't even know why, is they're like, why does this sound different than another yoga class? Because instead of saying, okay, warrior two, I would say, okay, the next invitation, if you'd like to, is to bring a foot forward. And then you might like to bend your front knee, or maybe not. Another option would be to bring your arms out to the side. I also see some people bringing their arms up overhead, or some people not doing anything with their arms. All of that's great options. And then we just keep moving through class like that. So why a lot of people who think they may not be good at yoga or have not enjoyed yoga before, a lot of that comes from, unfortunately, a hierarchy that's been created in the Western yoga industry of there is a teacher and a student and a right and a wrong way and a place that you're supposed to get your body to. And in trauma-informed yoga, there's none of that. In classes, there's always a time in every single one of my trauma-informed classes where every single person is doing something different. And that's wonderful.
I even noticed when you were speaking and when you said, let's go into warrior two, and then you said, or in trauma informed, I would say your voice changed.
Yeah.
It went much softer, much more even. Like I could tell that just in how you spoke from a pose to our option of what we're going to do. Is that intentional?
Absolutely. And it actually takes quite a bit of training for a trauma-informed yoga teacher, because the teacher has to learn to take out any of their own ego of what's going to happen during class. So for no one's real fault, we're just taught this throughout yoga industry that when we learn a certain set of poses and the teacher learns how to teach those, then there's a certain expectation when we teach those that people will at least try to follow along. And we may learn things like how to do some modifications if people need to be in a little bit of a different spot, or if they need an easier or more difficult option. But that intention comes through in people's voices. So when they say, okay, warrior two, bring your arms up, next pose, it's like that intention of, I'm expecting that you follow this now. Whereas in trauma-informed, part of what you're hearing is that there's actually a change in my mind as well of like, I'm going to offer this, and if no one follows along, that's absolutely fine. And it actually takes quite a bit of training for a teacher to know that you might teach something and every single person in the room might just look at you like, no.
Not today.
Yeah. And to be okay with like, that's not personal. Right? It actually takes quite a bit of training and inner work to know, like, that's not because they don't like me as a teacher or don't want to follow along, or they're not trying to make my day difficult. Like this is actually for them, and this is not for me at all.
How difficult was that for you, or how long did it take you to learn that and be okay with those things in a trauma-informed class?
That's an awesome question. I don't think that it took long, but it was a huge switch. When I went through trauma-informed yoga teacher training, I did it in the jungles of Costa Rica. I was like out of cell phone service in an ashram for like a week and a half. And every single day from like 9 to 7, they just picked apart our brains as yoga teachers. And we basically had to unlearn so much of what we were teaching. I think it didn't take long for me because at the time I was looking for a different way to teach. So I had been teaching for about 9 years at that point, and I loved the practice of yoga, but I felt like there was a different way to reach people. And especially I was trained in a really strict discipline. And when I found trauma-informed yoga along with the women's work that I was doing, I was like, I feel like there's something else that the people who I'm teaching need. And so when I found that, I think it just didn't take long because it made so much sense to me. And it's just how I would want to be spoken to. And so I think once that clicked, it made a lot of sense. But it was definitely a period of like, oh my gosh, I've been doing everything wrong, which is not true. It's just a different approach. But yeah, it was interesting to like pick apart all of those things that I've just been doing in my sleep pretty much, and having to get really, really intentional with how I'm saying everything and how I'm presenting it and what I'm thinking when I come into class. So it was an interesting and really, really deep learning process.
Do you still teach regular yoga?
Absolutely.
So is it difficult for you to kind of switch back and forth in a day, I would say?
No, because I think the deeper intention of what I offer is the same now. So I actually, the funny thing about once you're taught to teach in a trauma-informed way is it's really hard to not teach in that way, but it never hurts. So I actually use trauma-informed languaging in all of my classes. Just my class that I do that's especially for trauma-informed, I'm making sure that I'm in that mindset for the entire class. Whereas in my other classes, it kind of gets sprinkled in because the intention is just a little bit different. So we might be working on something like balance or a certain intention of our practice. And it just, the languaging starts to like get sprinkled in instead of be the actual focus for class.
What led you to want to learn trauma-informed yoga and teach it?
So actually I was working for the Summit Advocates in Summit County, Colorado, where we are. And I was really, really interested in especially the post-traumatic period. And I felt like when I started working for advocates and going through their trainings, that there was a gap, is what it felt like to me, because I felt like in our society in general, we have like a lot of support for crisis when this is actually happening. And then there's some support later, maybe therapy or talk therapy. But I felt like there was this gap of time where people went from like their entire world is flipped upside down and they don't even know who they are anymore or how life looks around them. And then they're kind of like, they have a job and a home and everything's like kind of okay, but it's still kind of not. And I feel like actually a lot of people are walking around like that now, whether they've been through a single instance of trauma or whether it's just this extreme amount of stress. I mean, we're still in a pandemic and that's been extremely stressful for so many people. And then we're like, okay, but I have my job, I have some food to eat, I have some clothes. So I'm just supposed to be good. Like I'm just supposed to show up happy in my life now because I technically have everything that I need to live. Mm-hmm. So I felt like there was some kind of gap in there. And I actually started looking into going back to school for social work and for psychology. And then I got to this point where I started researching and started finding out that there was such a thing as trauma-informed yoga. And that just really rung a bell to me because I had been doing and teaching yoga for so long that I'm like, this is something I already know how to do. So if I can take these expertise and just kind of hone in those skills to support people, I think this can be really helpful. So it was a really incredible bridge for me. And I think it's been great to see that evolve and to see how it can be really supportive, because I feel like no matter where people are in a stressful situation or any transition in life, it can be such a complementary practice. For example, I have been through therapy for much of my life. I started in college and I just love therapy. So I'm like in it all the time.
Same.
I just call it like maintenance. I'm like, this is my like weekly maintenance. It's great. And being someone who's always been really tactile, it helps so much to feel things in my body that talk therapy just didn't really reach for me. So I feel like it's been a really, really neat complementary therapy, really, to go through whatever else people are doing to support themselves in their lives.
Who is trauma-informed yoga for?
I'm really tempted to say everyone.
I kind of thought that might be your answer.
But there is a certain vulnerability with yoga. And I also think it's important to bring that to light, because I can also understand that it can be scary to show up to a yoga class. Like, you are moving in front of other people and people are watching, and you will likely be there for an hour and your phone won't be near you and you won't have distractions. And that can be a lot for some people. So the movement itself, I would say, is for everybody. It's like we talked about, just accessible. You can decide what you're doing and what you're not doing that day. There isn't a pressure to put legs above your head. We do a lot of also meditation and breath work in class, and we mix things up a lot so that the body and brain can stay really present. So I would say it's a practice for everyone who's ready to experience something like that. And I would say it's also okay if you're not at that point yet. I know there have been incredibly stressful periods of time in my life when I knew yoga was exactly what I needed and I could not access it. And I just had to let myself figure out life a little bit more and then start showing up to a practice like that. So I also think that people's brains and bodies know when they're ready. And it's also okay to give it a try. The cool thing about trauma-informed yoga, unlike most classes, is you can leave whenever you want. We never lock the door. You can walk outside. If you don't like it, 20 minutes in, you can leave. So there's a lot of room. So I would say if it's of interest at all, it's a really, really great place to start.
I am so glad that you said, if you don't like it, you can walk out. Because I was thinking that, as you were talking and saying sometimes it's difficult for people to show up and they're there for an hour. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple months ago because I was going to do something new and was very uncomfortable with doing it. And I was talking to her about it and I was like, gosh, Boo, we call each other Boo. That's a whole other story. Gosh, Boo, I don't want to do this. Like, this is going to be miserable. And she was like, well, Boo, because again, we call each other Boo. She said, Boo, it's okay. Because if you don't like it, just get up and leave. And then you'll never see those people again. So it's fine. So I'm glad that you also said that. And hopefully that will encourage people, whether it's trauma-informed yoga or just something else in their life that they might want to try, but they're a little hesitant, is to know, well, you can just get up and leave if you don't like it. They don't lock the door. Even in an escape room, they actually don't lock the door. So you can leave whenever you need to. Yeah,
it's really important. And I think it takes that autonomy, and it's something that I make sure to mention in my trauma-informed classes, because really that's the case in any yoga class, but teachers don't often mention it and it can be frowned upon. But I've never seen anyone walk out of a class and the teacher go chase them down the street. You know, if they want to leave, they can leave. That's totally on their own time. So that's another great thing about trauma-informed yoga is sometimes we just bring those things to the surface, that we get to say, like, if you have to go to the bathroom halfway through class, like, please go to the bathroom. Because sometimes we're just so in our mindsets of like, no one else is leaving. I have to stay here. I have to be here. But if really the teacher's job is to be there to serve you in your practice, and your practice ended 20 minutes ago, then like it could have ended 20 minutes ago.
And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love for you to talk for a couple minutes about breath work, because obviously we all know what breathing is. Hopefully we are all doing that. But breath work has become something, I feel like, that has become more popular, or maybe just more well-known, and is really effective, it seems like, at helping people with anxiety, trauma, other issues. So will you talk a little bit about that and what it can do for people?
Yeah, absolutely. How sciencey do you want me to get?
I mean, I like sciencey, so you go for it.
Okay, we'll go there. So we'll talk about specifically two areas of the brain. One is the reptilian brain that lives in the back of our skull, and the other is the frontal lobe, so right in the front of our foreheads. When we experience trauma, which can be, again, a single instance or many instances. In trauma-informed yoga, this might just help to know as well. We identify trauma as anything that is too much for the system to take on at one time. So it basically overexpands our nervous system's ability to process the emotion. So again, that can be one big thing that happens. There's just way too much for us to take on at once, or it might be a series of things that eventually just pile on. When that happens, the connection between our frontal lobe and our reptilian brain actually gets severed. So that can be why when people are dealing with experiences in post-traumatic stress or just extreme stress, that we might act in a way that we didn't mean to, because we have, they're called myelinated cords in our brains. And so when we have a thought, these myelinated cords are the quickest and they go directly to our reptilian brain. Our reptilian brain is responsible for our breathing, our digestion, our bathroom habits, things that we don't really have control over. And so that's why we may see people react in a way that might not seem so, what's the word, I guess, like in a way that we would support in society. Mm-hmm. So it could be like seemingly yelling out of nowhere or crying out of nowhere, or these huge reactions that we're like, what is that person doing? But it's really these reactions that are coming from way in the back of their brain because they lost this connection, which usually works like a filter. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like if someone cuts you off in traffic and you want to scream at them and run into the back of their car, but usually the frontal lobe will say, okay, like press your brake, take a breath, continue on. So what breath work does is it's actually the breath is the only system in our body that is connected by both. So we can control it, and it also happens without our controlling. So we can't tell our body, stop digesting now. It just happens. But we could tell ourselves, stop breathing now. And it happens. So when we practice a breathwork technique, and a breathwork technique is just anything that modifies our breath. So it could be taking a bigger inhale than you usually do. It could be holding your breath for a second. It could be a long, slow exhale. Anytime that we consciously do that, it's working on that connection and reconnecting those two areas of our brain. So this can be really helpful to bring back that connection in those who have experienced trauma or just when we're feeling extremely stressed. And that's where it can help eventually with things like anxiety or panic attacks that are really that release of our nervous system. But when we have that connection back to our frontal lobe, it can say, okay, maybe we need to walk outside. Like, what do we need as we're starting to feel that anxiety build before our nervous system kind of goes off the rails? Did that make sense?
It absolutely made sense. And it actually made me think about a time, without kind of knowing I was doing breath work, but I was about to experience a panic attack and said, okay, like, take a moment, let's walk outside. Let me just walk around, take some deep breaths. And I like to do, I don't know the official name, but like the box or the 4. So that's kind of what I do when I'm getting anxious or feeling panicky about something, is I'll do the box breathing and just try to focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those techniques can work. Even just counting your breath, just giving yourself some kind of recognition that we actually have control over it, because especially with anxiety, it can feel like we don't. And once it gets to a certain point, it can really feel like we can't stop it. And that can feel so scary for so many people, of being in that situation when our breath and our body is doing something that we feel like we can't control. So anytime that you have to practice that, especially when you're in a calm state, and that's kind of what we do in a yoga class too, is intentionally practice. It's a yoga practice, so that when you're feeling worked up, you have these things to come back to, and it's more automatic. So like you were saying, you barely even thought of it, right? Like there was something else in your brain. It was like, okay, I feel this coming on. Let's go take a walk. Let's go do some box breathing. And so there was something else in there that you had done that before, so that your body knew, okay, if I go for a walk, if I do this box breathing, then I know it's going to calm me down.
Is there a simple technique that you would give out to people that they could practice, that they could then utilize when they hit a stressful or an anxious situation?
Yeah, there's so many. Box breathing is a great one. Like you were suggesting, and box breathing is where you breathe for the same amount of counts for your inhale, you hold your breath for the same amount of counts, exhale, and then hold your breath. So people think of it like a box. Another one I like, even just a simplified technique of that, is just taking a deep breath in, holding your breath at the top for a couple counts, and then a really long, slow exhale. And you could just do that a couple times. I think of it as, I call it a catch breath, because I think of in our bodies, especially, anxiety rises. We think of anxiety as a rising energy, and depression is a cooling or a downward energy. And you can maybe even feel that in your body. When we feel like anxiety, it feels like it's like bubbling up our chest. And when we feel depression, it feels like low and heavy. So that catch breath is like taking all of that up. I think of like holding it at the top and then just really slowly letting it go. So that can be like a tense situation or an emotion. And we just like gather that all together, catch it, hold it for a while, and then slowly exhale. So that's just one. A lot of them that we do in classes are physical as well. And so we learn things like places to put hands on your body, like our heart, our bellies, our forehead can be some really calming places, or just wrapping the body sometimes, like crossing the arms and hugging the chest really close. So these are all kind of things that we practice during class, so that you can have a number of them in your back pocket. And most of the things that we practice, you can actually do without other people even knowing you're doing them. So kind of like the box breathing, you could do that in the middle of a conversation. Or the catch breath, you could do that like while you're talking to someone and like no one will really notice. And even sometimes something like holding your arms, people will think you're crossing your arms. And so some of these are like sneaky techniques too, for if you're around other people and feeling overwhelmed, and you don't have to like do yoga. But,
and you could,
but you might feel a little safer just like putting a hand on your belly and no one will really know what you're doing.
Absolutely. And it sounds like it is important for people to practice these things before they're needed, just kind of like any other skill. You don't want to throw it into play at the tense moment when you're about to freak out and you're like, wait, I remember there was a box. It was gift wrapped. I don't know. What am I supposed to do? So practice is important.
Yes, absolutely. Because we almost want to get it to a point in our brain that's not conscious. Because like you were saying, there was something that happened in your mind when you felt anxiety coming up that you were able to access really quickly, even in a heightened state, that was able to tell you, okay, let's go outside and go for a walk. Whereas I'm sure listeners who have been in those situations can relate to that sometimes when our bodies are in those heightened places, our brains are disconnected and we're like, I don't even know how to take care of myself right now. I know this is bubbling up. I'm not really sure how to deal with it. Or I know I don't want to yell at this person or react this way, but I'm not sure what else to do. But if you have a practice like that, it's like you've done it so many times that your body can remember it, then it can become really accessible. So yes, like you said, practicing once or twice can be great, but if you're able to practice this often, and especially when you're in a calm state, then it can be a lot easier to access.
Tell me your best piece of wellness advice that you would give out.
There's actually one that we learned during our training. I won't get the exact quote right, but it's
nobody will know though.
Something around the concept of there's no one way to the ocean, and every drop reaches the ocean in its own path. And it was an explanation when we were learning about different practices, just to understand that some things will work for some people and some things will work for some people in some stages of life. And those can always be different. And to recognize whether you're in my position of teaching or just in a position of telling a friend, to be really conscious of how we share our wellness advice with others. 'Cause it can be really exciting when we find something and we're like, I love kickboxing. And then your friend's like, I do not.
I hate it.
You're like, this saved my life. And she's like, no.
Good for you.
So I always try to keep that in mind too. It's really hard sometimes to not preach when we get something that we're so excited about. And then to realize if it's not their practice, it's not their practice. And it also doesn't mean that it's not going to be their practice tomorrow and that it won't be yours.
We have not talked a ton about relationships other than kind of relationships with yourself. But what is a piece of relationship advice, and whether that is a relationship with yourself or another human being, but what is a piece of relationship advice that you would give out?
I would say it goes back to our conversation on intuition. I think my biggest piece of advice is just to trust your intuition and your instinct above all else. And it's not easy. Really, really difficult sometimes. But I think so much, or so many of us just know when we meet a person or when we're around people, how that makes us feel. And so we kind of talked about those layers of like, well, no, they seem really great, or I don't know why I'm getting this weird feeling. but almost every situation I've heard of, when we have an instinct like that, it's usually correct.
We have talked about a lot. We even got sciencey there for a minute. So now we're going to take it down a notch before our time is up. And we're going to talk about tattoos. So as people who watch and listen know, I love tattoos, and I have a lot of tattoos, and you can't see any of them right now because I'm never going to get a face tattoo. But I would love to hear about your tattoo.
Yes. So from when I was probably in my late teens, I had really wanted a tattoo, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted yet. I went through my yoga teacher training, my first one, when I was 19. And then I traveled to India. And in yoga, they have these precepts that are kind of like the 10 Commandments, but yoga style, ways to treat yourself and ways to treat others. One of them is called Santosha, or that's how to say it in Sanskrit. And it means contentment. And the story behind it is to be content with what you have. And there's also another layer to it to understand that whatever path you're on is your path. And if you feel like you fall off of it, you actually never do, because that's part of your path. And so it's just understanding that everything that you have is exactly what you need to have at this time. And that was hitting me really hard, especially in late college, when I felt like, and kind of always have been, a drifter in social situations. So I've kind of been like a little bit of everyone's friend. And that always kind of caused me to be like, oh, but what is that group doing? What is that group doing? Because I could kind of drift in between. And I started realizing the discontent that was creating, that I always was like, is that group going to be better? Is this activity going to be better? So understanding like whatever I'm doing right now is the best thing because I'm here. And whatever decision I make is going to be the best thing because that's my path. So it took me going to India and actually learning Hindi so that I could write it out in its script. Because I had seen a picture of like the traditional script that it was written in, but I had also heard horror stories of people getting tattoos and then it like not really. Mm-hmm. So I probably checked this tattoo like probably with 10 different people in India. I would like write it on a piece of paper and be like, tell me what this says. And so eventually I got back to the States and wrote it on a piece of paper in brown Sharpie because I wanted it to be in brown so that it was like henna. Mm-hmm. And they were able to just copy it so that it's like my exact writing on my foot so that I see it during my practice. And so far, that's my only one. I find it like a little ironic if I get another tattoo after my contentment tattoo. So far, I've just stuck with the single one. We'll see.
But if you get another tattoo, it's your path. So it's okay. It's okay. Well, now I don't even know if I should ask this, but I'm going to. Have you ever thought about another tattoo, and what would it be if you were to get one?
I went through a phase where I wanted like a mountainscape on my shoulder. And for those listening who don't live here, it's a very popular tattoo that I soon found out. So that kind of swayed me because back to I like being different.
Absolutely.
I think the only thing right now, I've told my mom many times that I want to get a tattoo with her, and she is absolutely opposed. But if she ever changed her mind, I don't know what we would get, but whatever she wants, I'm game.
I took my mom to get her one and only tattoo.
Did you get a matching one?
No, I did not. Now, I'm not opposed to matching tattoos because I do have a couple, but I actually already had a similar version of the tattoo that she got. Mine is now covered up with another tattoo, so you can't see it. But yeah, so it can be a good family bonding experience if your mom is down.
I agree.
Well, Mia, you have been amazing. Where can people find you if they want to follow you? Maybe if they are local and want to check out a yoga class with you, or if you ever decide to do remote classes, or maybe you do those now, why don't you tell everybody where they can hook up with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 places. My work is at movecreateradiate.com, and my Instagram handle is the same, movecreateradiate. And I like to put up a lot of videos on there of some breathwork techniques and self-soothing techniques. So that can be a great place if you're not in the area to just follow along. And if you are passing through thriveyogaSummit.com is where you can find all of our classes. Right now, we're not doing anything remote. We may in the future, but we do have a yoga for mental health class every Sunday, and that's our trauma-informed class. And then a lot of our classes are wonderful for beginners and for those just wanting to experience without any crazy pressure.
I bet if you ever decided to do like a one-off, trauma-informed or something like that, virtually, I bet right now there are people typing into the live chat on YouTube that they would be down for it. So cool. I will let you know, but I bet right now there are people going, yeah, I would try that. So I'll update you. And if you're willing, maybe we could get together a little group of us to do that with you.
Even better on your computer, and then you can turn off your screen and then no one has to see what you're doing.
Exactly.
But if you want to keep it on, you can do that too.
Yeah. I mean, I would leave mine on just, so people could laugh at me if they wanted to.
So I know you're still there.
That's right. That's right. I would be there. And trauma-informed, I do want to point out, even though yoga is not my thing, trauma-informed yoga is amazing. I have done it and really enjoyed it because it wasn't, to me, like yoga. And I felt very empowered and very comfortable in doing it. So I highly encourage it as well. Well, Mia, thank you so much for being here with me today and for sharing all of your expertise. I feel like there is a ton that we could still dive into. So I definitely see a part 2 if you are willing to do that. But for now, I truly appreciate your time, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for all your wonderful questions, and I can't wait for part 2. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I really hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Mia as much as I did. I truly appreciate the little exercises that she talked about where we can learn to better listen to our own intuition, and also the breathwork exercises that you can do at home to help yourself in a stressful situation. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're available on the Spear Talk channel. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.